Okay, we are live.
I kind of figured. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And for the record, my name is Bill Moore, Will to Senator Sears, and I'm the firearms policy analyst for the Vermont Traditions Coalition. And here to present some testimony on S3, the strike all specifically, not the underlying old version of the bill. So if you haven't seen it, I believe Peggy's probably posted it by now, but I don't know. I also emailed it directly to you if that's more convenient for the members. My written testimony. I'll try to move through it fairly quickly. It's a big, long document, but most of it is supporting stuff that you can reference later on. I'm not going to read 11 pages, obviously. So on that note, it's good to be back in the room, back in the building. Senator? Hello. Eric and I did get to share. I shared some information with him about where I was headed so that that he would have some idea. And he was helpful in correcting me on some of my misunderstandings. So appreciate that as well. So what may surprise you is we agree with the sponsors of the bill on the stated policy goal, if not the terminology. We also agree in part with Mary McCord, who testified earlier on the bill, as well as similar legislation in Oregon, February 6th of this year. The Georgetown University Law Center's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection also summarizes well the nature of the Oregon statute and the nearly identical to Vermont language in the Oregon Constitution. In a catalog of various state legal schemes on the issues of paramilitary activity and civil disorder, and I will review these shortly as part of my testimony. Allow me to state that we take a firm position that all militia organized and activated any time for purposes of defense of the state absolutely are and of right ought to be constitutionally under the civil power as determined by the Constitution of the state of Vermont in chapters 1, Article 16, and chapter 2, Article 59. And I will spare you reading through those. They are on the page in front of you. On that Oregon statute and the ICAP and Vermont traditions, we agree. Vermont statute further locks in the civil powers being found in the executive primarily. It's fair to say that all 50 states do this in some statutory form or other. In Vermont, the organized militia shall be organized in accordance with the federal regulations and approved by the governor according to 20 VSA 361. When taken with the above constitutional articles, it's clearly implied the legislature may take appropriate statutory notice of residents acting outside these clear authorities. The key points are that any militia activity organized and activated for any purpose, such as civil disorder, outside these may be defined in statute as a crime. So far, so good. While the bill doesn't attempt that, it does so in many ways that will be difficult, if not possible, to define. Asking prosecutors and criminal courts to discern, allege, and show if the person knows or reasonably should know that the teaching, training, or demonstrating will be unlawfully employed for use in or in furtherance of a civil disorder creates a conundrum. First, it describes a conspiracy. Either way you apply subsection 4071 language. Yet conspiracy is already fully defined and proscribed in 1350 VSA 1404. That statute states in part, no person shall be convicted of conspiracy unless a substantial overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy is alleged and proved to have been done by the defendant or by a co-conspirator. The strike-all amendment, as submitted, creates a parallel statutory construction of conspiracy that is in contradiction to that existing statute. It turns on the parallel evidentiary statement, if the person knows or reasonably should know. And I submit that these two cannot coexist without creating a constitutional backwash. The newly proposed language creates a crime of association. where intent is somehow discerned by a co-conspirator who is responsible criminally for knowing another person's acts will be unlawfully employed for use in or furtherance of a civil disorder. Those alleged to this presumed knowledge of who will engage in furtherance of a civil disorder are guilty by association and not by any discernible intent. And by discernible, I mean in the court. Second, the Strike-All Amendment fails to elaborate what constitutes unauthorized military training or what paramilitary training is in any significant and meaningful way. I added that because it still exists in the title. So that may be a matter for you folks simply editing at a future date. Attempts at defining this appear within the description of the offenses, but in no direct terms are they described in the definition section. The reason this may be impossible is because all the acts of teaching, training, to demonstrate, instruct, or practice it referenced are all constitutionally protected innocent activities on their own. Aggregation of these acts in the context of secondhand knowledge of the state of mind of others in the group do not change these acts' nature or lawfulness. Making these criminal by association or assembly in groups for these same lawful purposes sets a shaky premise for defining a felony in statute. An elegant alternative is easily at hand, and without being a hazard to the First Amendment of the U.S. Bill of Rights. The existing established conspiracy statute employs the direct and more concrete, quote, substantial overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy is alleged and proved. And the list of offenses include murder, arson, sexual exploitation of children, and a myriad of illegal drug trafficking offenses. In order to clarify the evidentiary standards, avoid the guilt by association, and third-party discernment of intent faults of the bill, I propose attaching here at 13 VSA 1404 a crime of, quote, organizing and activating a militia without civil authority as described in 20 VSA 361 sub B, and rules adopted as defined in 13 VSA 361 C. I would leave that to Eric to discern whether the rules are pertinent to the definition of the crime in that case for drafting. As with the Oregon statute, that crime should also be defined as 3 or more persons. It may also be appropriate to add 13 VSA 608 assaults and robbery within the conspiracy list to encapsulate rioting and looting as an active organized group, the tactic sometimes described as typical of illegal militia activity. Final conclusions. There must be a way to articulate the civil supremacy clause in activation and organization of the militia while allowing that the body of the people represents an unorganized militia, ready and constitutionally recognized as such in Presser, Heller, Bruin, and several other state statutory schemes with identical constitutional articles, such as Oregon and Pennsylvania. And we're all fairly familiar, I suppose, at this point, that Pennsylvania's drafting was a template for our founders in their drafting of our constitutional provisions. At the same time, we must recognize that the possible and likely outcome of a statutory scheme as proposed is eerily familiar to historians of civil rights and 20th century law enforcement. That is a history of abuse against unpopular political groups, such as the Black Panthers, SDS, and leaders like Dr. King and Panthers leader Fred Hampton, who was assassinated while being served a search warrant at 4 a.m. The low level of evidentiary necessity may lead to abuse and a desire to err on the side of caution in seeking injunctive relief by the Attorney General, while also prematurely relieving the pressures to develop the more difficult and significant potential criminal convictions which address true active threats to the state of Vermont. These are best served under the existing conspiracy statute with a pending crime of organizing and activating a militia. The main issues here are a vague and minimal evidentiary standard for a very serious allegation of planning a violent disorder, as well as the exercise of a form of prior restraint on the rights of assembly and association with a very poorly detailed civil enforcement via injunctive relief. This last will preclude the demand for robust evidentiary standards, adequate representation, and allowances for right to counsel in the preparation of a legal defense. On behalf of those groups that may exist and form in the future of any political strikes, we must resist language and powers this strike all language represents. On a personal note, in hopes the statute of limitations is run out here, is a case in point. During the 1990s, I participated in a political direct action whose aim was to block and shut down the New York Stock Exchange. This is part of the anti-war movement at the time. We participated in several organized affinity group trainings, which explained and allowed us to practice tactics to obstruct police in their efforts to stop the direct action. These were billed as nonviolent, but the tactics included sabotage of vehicles and mass gatherings to obstruct law enforcement in the course of their duties. These affinity groups met and used facility spaces at Johnson State College, as well as several Unitarian Universalist church buildings and grounds. My participation was also facilitated by coordinated bus transportation and an overnight stay at sponsored households near the event in New York State. Which of these events, sponsorship leaders, transportation providers, and households would not be subject to the vague and constitutionally questionable assaults on association and assemblage rights envisioned here in the S3 strike all? I plead the fifth on that answer. I hope the Judiciary Committee will seek legislative counsel and testimony of the Defender General on this proposed inclusion within the conspiracy statute. I've made ACLU Vermont aware of my concerns. They may also want to weigh in if invited. Sheriffs who have experience with allegations of this type may also be of assistance, and I look forward to any questions you may have. I can provide further detailed documentation and links to some of the topics in my piece. I didn't hound you with embedded links because it makes the copy very difficult, and the relevant sections are you were already aware of from this court. I found her organization to be highly credible, although I disagree with some of their proposed and encouraged statutes in other states. But on the facts, did quite a good job. So it was very helpful to me. She was here, I thank her in person, to be able to prepare this testimony. So on that note, I'd love to have questions. I hope there's enough interest to have some.
I don't have a question, but I'll just say it has seemed to me since I learned about this, I'll call it a template that 25 states have. Since I learned about that, it's been helpful to me to know that that exists in that many states and has been upheld in courts. So for me, one of the strengths of the strike all is that it has that backing. If we set about creating a new construct, we can't say that. Then we're striking out on our own. And we have had positive testimony on it from elsewhere. So I take the cautions, but I would just say it has stood up in court. So
right, and I almost anticipated that would be part of the response. I'll say two things about that. First of all, there's nothing different in the proposal than suggesting that's outside of that same framework. It's simply using it, putting it in a place in statute that already exists, that has a high evidentiary standard. And also I want to strongly repeat, striking of the injunctive relief section. That is the most dangerous part to free assemblage and free speech. And I appreciate the intent to be able to have quick action. But I think the energy of special task force, state police level, investigative arms of the Attorney General's office and public safety generally would address that in a much more hard-hitting way. These people need, if it happens, they need to be dragged into court quickly, charged, and slapped with very difficult conditions of release. And I have no problem with that because, listen, my first look at this led me to the treason statute because that's how close this gets. But I decided against that because I am conscientiously opposed to the death penalty as a person, as an individual, and our treason statute includes the death penalty. I suspect it'll never be imposed, but it's still there in statute. So I looked further and I found the conspiracy statute. It makes the structure for criminal charges accessible beyond individual charges. It provides a framework for investigation and interrogation, as well as reaching out to co-conspirators or people near the alleged conspiracy to engage with law enforcement in acts of removing themselves as part of the defense. So it creates also that incentive for law enforcement and investigative arms of all these points I've described. If the three of us are in the room and the two of you are discussing a thing that you're assuming I'm interested in engaging with, I have the opportunity at every moment until the act to engage under the conspiracy statute in several methods of defense by not acting, by obstructing acts and furtherance, and by reaching out to law enforcement. It's all in that statute. I would urge you, if nothing else, to take the time to read that. It's about a paragraph, several lines in the conspiracy description that I cited there later in the paper. Hope that's helpful.
Just to the point of the standard of evidence, I just want to touch on that. I appreciate your testimony, and Eric, if you have any thoughts, happy to hear. But I have to disagree somewhat that the standard of evidence is low. The reason for that is from what I'm understanding and reading. There's 4 elements of the mental intent, the mens rea. The 2 highest are purposefully acting or knowingly acting. And then after that, you have reckless and then you have negligence. And what I'm seeing is that this involves purposefully participating in this or knowingly participating in this. So, and that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So, I hear, from multiple folks that there's concerns about being able to prove something like this, but I'm just not really seeing that from what I'm reading. So just wanted to put that out there if you have any additional thoughts.
So there is a distinct difference between the, between the drafting and the Oregon law. Because in the Oregon law, in the analog 2 paragraphs, it exhibits, displays, or demonstrates. It's on page 7 for what it's worth. That's an analog to your, was it 407.1? The description. That's an analog to that, and those 2 paragraphs as the operative clause for evidentiary standards says, and intends or knows that such firearms, and intends with intent or to unlawfully employ. That is stronger language that is in the strike law. And I can flip back to that just to reiterate that or reinforce that. If the person knows or reasonably should know is a lower standard of evidence than what I just described. And that's what's in the 407.1 as drafted. It would be as strong, you could make a strong case to simply adopt that Oregon language that makes it clear that the level of intent has to be beyond reasonable doubt, which is what the Oregon statute. And again, just Ms. McCord testified strongly in favor of that statute.
Just because I'm a slow note take, can you repeat the Oregon?
Oh, yeah, sure. And intends or knows. And then in the second paragraph, it's with the intent to unlawfully employ. So it's a much higher standard. So and Eric can probably, drafting can be tricky, and there are some phrases that come right out of the courts. And Eric knows these things and better than I don't profess to be an attorney. I try to do the best I can. But I think when you get to some sort of knowledge of your co-conspirator's intent, that's tricky.
I don't want to debate.
No, I don't need
this.
Hoping to help.
I appreciate your effort, and I want to get on with the bill. So, Eric, do you have comments on this particular area that she just brought up?
I do, and I hate to throw a little something different in at the last minute, but I only have just recently been sort of sussing out this detail. But here's what I would say, that You have a couple of different mens rea standards in there. You have knowingly, which is comparable to intentionally. You know what you're doing, you intend the consequences of your act. And also, back up for a second, remember we have two different offenses here. One is the teaching, one is the gathering with somebody else to be taught and use it for civil disorder. That's why you got your 1 and your 2, right? One has to do with the unlawful teaching, number 2 has to do with the unlawful, we're being taught and we're going to use what we're taught for purposes of a civil disorder. Both of them have each of the two standards that you know or reasonably should know that either what you're teaching or what you're being taught will be used for a civil disorder. The knowingly one is an intentional standard, Senator Hashimi, you were just mentioning. The reason we should know is a reckless standard. It's a negligent standard. And both of them have support in the law in the sense that there are other Vermont criminal statutes. Knowing and intentionally is a far more common mens rea, mental state that's required. There are some that use the reason we should know. Is that just looking at the other states that all do this, 25 is just pouring, trying to run through all of them as quickly as I could. The first subdivision, the teaching one that employs knows or reasonably should know, that's the vast majority of the other states use that exact same principle. As Bill mentioned,
I don't care. He likes calling me Will, and I enjoy it.
As Bill mentioned, it is true that Oregon uses the higher standard. That is true. But the majority of states do actually use the one that we have here. For the first subdivision, for the teaching. For the second one, for the being taught, that actually, the other states generally just use intentional, not the reason we should know. And you can sort of think why that might make some sense, because, if you're the teacher, you might have a better argument that you reasonably should know that what you're being taught is going to be used by these people for purposes of a civil disorder. I'm sort of trying to think of why. And I haven't talked to legislative council. I don't know why in the other states they did this. But in the other states, so if you were to look at subdivision 2, lines 19 to 20, what I see in the other states is if the person knows or intends that the teaching, training, or instruction will be unlawful use for a civil disorder. So that doesn't mean this is wrong or that you can't do this. But since I know the committee wanted to be cognizant of what was being done in other states on this and track what has been upheld.
And given that, I would be fine with changing it to what the majority of states do with both sections.
Okay.
I don't know how others
No, I'm fine for that.
feel. But I would also argue that in the civil piece, we leave that standard where it is currently.
Yes, that's the standard civil
Yeah.
threshold. That's civil proceedings are different. That's more likely than not. So yeah, that's
What's the threshold for the civil? I don't have the
preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not.
Yeah, so I was going to comment that by raising the standard anywhere in the operative clauses, you do raise it, at least in the affidavit supporting any injunction. So it is a remedy in the direction that I'm requesting to some degree. I wanted to point one more thing out that I couldn't squeeze into all this. In the Oregon statute, which you're following to some degree, their definition includes exemptions such as you've expressed. And there one regarding the Department of Fish and Wildlife, karate clubs, defense clinics, safe handling, use of firearms, sports, including but not limited to hunting activities, blah, blah, blah. Ends with this statement, which does not include a conspiracy as defined in Oregon statute 161.450, which I've included as an appendix. So that also describes civil disorder as an act of physical violence by assemblages of 3 or more persons, which cause damage or injury thereof. So they're stronger in several other areas as well, and I urge you to consider just including some of that language to just
to clarify, we weren't working from the Oregon statute.
Oh, no, I meant the model
Yeah.
that Georgetown has.
Right, and
Which is great work.
Yeah, we made a decision not to use
Are there
So that's why.
probation officers out there?
Who's it?
Are those people out there?
Dr. Chen? Yes, Dr. Chen's out there.
Well, yeah, these agendas get backed up.
Mr. Chair.
I'm trying to
have we,
process.
Finished with this and moved to.
Yeah, I think we've moved to vote.
Very good.
Appreciate it. So the change that you're proposing to make, Senator Booth,
Yes,
would be the standard of, for
Yeah.
the criminal act,
for the second section.
for the second section.
Clarify, so that actually, so my concern with this has actually been that it would be too difficult to get out ahead. So if we're gonna make it even harder, I have concerns with that. Like I understand in, conspiracy and treason, we're talking about acts that have already happened. I view this as a way of preventing those acts from happening, so if we're making it actually more difficult. That gives me pretty great concern.
And that's the tension we're working with is, on the one hand, trying to have a knowingly standard, a mens rea standard, so that there isn't the sort of abuse that the witness was talking about. And yet I'm 100% with you that we want it to be useful in the event that it's needed. Maybe a question for Eric, if we made that change in the second section from reasonably should have known to knows or intends, do you think that reduced the effectiveness appreciably?
I think, the evidence that's gonna come in either case is gonna be the same evidence that is out there for what it is that's going on in the teaching and the instruction that's being received by the participants. And to what extent that whatever they've compiled, whatever they've gathered for indicators that, whether it's, as we talked about earlier, text messages, conversations, maybe there was an embedded confidential informant, whatever it may be. It just goes to whether or not the participants have intended that they're going to take all this instruction and go out and use it in a civil disorder. So the threshold is a bit higher. Perhaps, it would mean the difference between whether you had 3 indicators and 4, something like that. How many, what's our evidence here that it was being intended or the person is different. But as far as the essentially you're talking about whether the state's attorney is going to break the case on the basis of find a conclusion that there's probable cause to believe that the crime has occurred. And the more evidence they have, as in all cases, the more likely they'll break it. But I think they'll be looking at the same quantum of evidence in either case. Whatever the standard is, I should say.
So are you saying, Eric, the bill we're presently looking at, the evidence is, it's a much higher standard than if we make this change?
Say that one more time, sorry, no,
Are
sorry.
you saying that this bill that we're presently looking at, S3?
Yeah.
As it stands, that the evidence is, or the likelihood is higher, or the requirements are higher of proof versus if we change it versus, what are you saying?
No, I think it's
exactly
the opposite.
It would make it harder if we make this change.
The proof requirements would be higher if you do make the change.
Okay. So I guess the question is, do we see value in aligning with the 25 other states that are out there, or do we see value in innovating just a little bit to, because it's not a great deal of difference in the standard, but it is there. So,
I vote to keep it the way it is.
okay, me too. Other thoughts?
I'm on the fence, but yeah, no, I'm on the fence at the moment. So I know we want to vote this out, but I don't want to force
Wait
it.
till Friday,
Well, I would
but I
really,
would like to do it today.
if we can.
We can do it tomorrow morning, actually.
Yeah, I would almost rather have it come out today regardless of which we pick. In other words, if we straw vote this question and decide based on that, I think,
I think there's three here.
Well, I'll say that, while I'd like to explore the conversation of the standards of the evidence, I'm not gonna vote no as it currently is.
I certainly support not making it more difficult, because I already think it's too difficult, so.
I agree that it's gonna be difficult, but I think it should be difficult. To thin line, and you need evidence, and I would think the only way you're gonna get evidence is people who are either embedded within that organization, or people who just say, I didn't realize I was getting myself into this mess. I gotta believe that there's a lot of those people from January 6th who wondered, how in the hell did I get into this mess? Who are now, either serving time or being charged with crimes. So I think that it's gonna take, because of the crime that we're creating here, and because of the difficulty, I see either way being difficult to prove. But I do think it will at least avoid having our state government say there's nothing we can do. And we have a civil process as well, which I think may be the more important piece in all of this.
I would argue that there is value in also aligning with what other states are doing and having consistency across state lines, because these issues aren't just a local Vermont issue. A lot of these groups are interstate organizations. They receive funding from different places, and to have that consistency with other states, I think, in situations like this can be valuable.
well, I'll just throw in, the Slate Bridge case has been going on 4 years. And to me, that speaks to the difficulty of addressing this problem. So if we put out something that the standards are just too high and prosecutors can't use it in real life, I don't think we're doing anybody any good. I don't think personally, the way it's drafted, you're going to get action without real evidence that there's intent. So for me, it's it's a little bit of how many angels can you fit on a pin, whether we go with this standard or the other in the second section, because you're going to need pretty demonstrable proof of intent, or you're not going to get action under either standard. So I would, with Senator Michalski, probably lean toward current language as, a tiny bit leaning toward action rather than.
That's where I'm at. Leave draft 1.1 as is.
We haven't heard from Senator Norris, and I think Robert's not yet finished thinking.
Yeah, not yet finished thinking. We're excited. Do you have anything, Senator Norris?
No, I've gone over this several times, I might add, and I've spoke to the sponsor bill, whatever else, and I'm satisfied with this as presently.
All right.
Okay,
Is there any further, is there a motion?
I can't move my own bill.
I'll make a motion.
Senator Norris has moved to report favorably as 3 as amended. Draft 1.1. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Peggy, would you please call the roll?
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Norris,
Yes.
Senator Michalski,
Yes.
Senator Hashim,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes. Senator Baruch, would you like to report this?
I would like to.
I'm shocked.
I never expected that.
We need a second.
I don't think we technically
We
do
don't
it.
use that.
Oh, we don't need a second.
If I could, Senator Six, I just wanted to thank the committee, thank the witnesses. This is an unusual bill in my experience where there has not been animosity, there has not been a lot of sniping back and forth. I have felt the witnesses have been extremely helpful in reaching a conclusion. the committee similarly. And so I was very surprised and pleased at how this came together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I asked my pastor to pray for me and myself today.
Come on in.
Apparently it helped.
Steve, do you want to come in? We're running out of, I've got 15 minutes to hear from probation officer.
Who are you looking for?
Steve Howard or three probation
Are
officers?
you testifying? No, but okay, we're ready. Oh, you are? Oh, great. Come on in. Believe it or not, I'm actually covering this for my employer. Timing is good.
Just have
We did that
probation
just for
officer.
you.
Just probation, there's DCF's upstairs.
Oh, that's all right.
That chair's open if you want to sit. I just.
Go to the most important person in the room first. Would you like a cookie?
Thank you.
I made it myself.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that
You
powerful
made them
people have
yourself?
cookies first.
I'm gonna have diabetes by the end of the
Oh
summer.
my God.
Cookie,
Well, that's
cookies.
why we have it today.
I'm on a VSBA one.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to pass.
Over there, stand by the door. There's no room in these rooms.
Got one?
Did you find the DCF crowd upstairs?
I have already had like 4 cookies today, but maybe later.
Anybody else want a cookie? Mr. President.
So we're on a rather tight time frame.
I grabbed him there in Lieutenant Governor's office, right?
Unexpected.
Okay.
Dr. Chen,
I'm gonna cover this by Zoom. I'll let you guys
I
have
don't
your
think
chairs.
the DCF workers here are.
Thank you
Yes,
all.
we've got some DCF workers,
I'll get
or not
this on Zoom.
DCF,
Just DOC today.
So I let you start and you got about 15 minutes.
We'll keep it very short. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would like to start by introducing Leona Watt, who's the chair of the Legislative Committee of the SCA, the 6,000 members of state employees around the state. And then the other members who are all here will introduce themselves in a moment. Leona grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and she attended SUNY Albany, so right close to Bennington, and became involved with the state of Vermont, when she learned about our very progressive correction system, which at that time was somewhat unusual across America. Why don't I turn it over to Leona? And if you don't mind, why don't we just have the other members introduce themselves? Why don't we start at that end?
Hi, I'm Nicholas Merrill. I'm a supervisor at the Springfield Probation and Parole Office, and I'm really here today to support Leona and Chris Granger.
Good afternoon, I think almost. I'm Megan Place. I am the victim services specialist with the Vermont Department of Corrections serving Orange, Windsor, and Reno County, and formerly was a victim advocate with the Windsor County State Attorney's Office for 14 years. I saw you trying to remember how
recognize you. I was
yeah.
like, where did yeah.
I'm Shane Garrity. I'm a CO2 at Northwest State Correctional Facility. I'm going on 8 years.
I'm Christina Granger. I'm a probation and parole officer out of Brattleboro, Vermont. I've been with the department for 17 years.
Sir, how are you? So if it's okay with the chair, we'll have Leona start and just quickly go through our corrections issues. So go ahead.
All the corrections issues?
Well, whatever ones you want to focus on in 15 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes, go. Hi. I met you before.
Cheers.
Yes.
Bennington County.
So I think one of the main things we always say is I'm here on my own time and as a citizen and the legislative chair for VSCA for this current session. And I am Leona Watt. I became very involved in the State House when I served on the pension task force, which was very eye-opening. I've been working for the Department of Corrections for 18 years. I'm currently the senior probation officer in Springfield Probation Parole. And just speaking as part of the Department of Corrections. And I think something I wrote down, I was like, because they're like, what are your agenda items? And the things that I put down, very simple. We are tired. For those who are in the jails, they are tired. And I'm not just talking about tired physically, they're tired mentally. I'm tired physically, I'm tired mentally. Because what is going on right now in corrections is not sustainable. We work a lot. We want to support those in the field. We want to support those who are in the facilities because they are our fellow, I love to say it because I like saying brothers and sisters. They're our fellow brothers and sisters. We want to support them, but we're tired because we're being called on to do a lot of work in the facilities, such as hospital coverage and whatnot. But I understand why, because those are 24/7 facilities. But we also are expected to do our jobs in the community. Because when someone is released from jail, they're supervised if they have that type of supervision. They're supervised by probation and parole. But if we're so tired and so stressed out from all of the different roles we're expected to play, how does that protect the Vermonters? How does that protect those who are the victims, who are asking us to provide this supervision and provide these safeguards for them? So my biggest issues right now that I can state on this lovely Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2023, are around the issues of short staffing in the facilities, which impacts those of us who work in the field. It hugely impacts those who work in the facilities because it's their lives. I've heard from them so often about, do you understand what we're going through? And I'm like, I do, because I get emails. And when I took on the legislative chair back in June or July of 2022, I wasn't expecting to get emails with people, but they're like, oh, we put your email out. And I'm getting the emails about the issues that are around the state. And it's shocking because I didn't expect it. I hear it from Springfield because I know people who work in the Springfield facility, but you hear it from all over the state. And these are some of the same issues. And the short staffing is huge. That is just one of the biggest issues that is facing corrections right now. And it impacts everyone in corrections. And I think you've heard that before, but it impacts all of us in corrections because we have to stand up and say we have to help, but it's also impacting our lives greatly. And I don't have enough time to tell you how it has impacted me personally, but I know of so many people and so many members who are considering leaving corrections because they can't take this anymore and the pressure. But that's just one of my biggest agenda items of what is going on. Where is the hurt? And the hurt is the short staff and how we can deal with that. And I'm not saying that solutions aren't being sought, but right now, what is hurting right now is the short staffing, and it's impacting the facilities and the field.
Question. I think we have to add to that. You mentioned victims, but also future victims who are, because when people aren't being supervised, they tend to become out of control in the community. We've seen that with increased numbers of detentioners. I suspect some of that's due to the inability to supervise in the community. I also believe that the quicker, there's two theories of thought. One, if there are certain people that you're better off not doing anything with. We all know that. Certain offenders, if you just have them call in when they get arrested or something, that's it. But with some of the people that are particularly high needs, you're leaving them out there to create future victims. So I would agree that it is a problem. I don't know the solution. How to get more people interested in corrections when what you say is people are wanting to leave. And I think it's created a huge problem. What's the solution?
I wish I had that magic ball, but I think you're going to hear a lot about, it's about the recruitment and the retention, right? It's not enough to recruit and have the largest academy class ever. It's retaining the new class that we bring in into the facilities, but also retaining the people we already have in the facilities. So it's not easy. We've been talking about this in corrections for years, but we're really at a point right now, there's a great hurt.
I don't disagree that we're at a point where it hurts. you know, I'm sitting on the appropriations committee where we have money in the Budget Adjustment Act to pay more.
Yeah.
To recruit and to retain, and that's a priority
Right.
for us. Senator?
So when you have people leaving, what's their, do you know what their number one issue is that they voice as to why they're leaving?
Yes. They're working too much.
And that's because they're short-staffed.
When you're working 16 hours, and then also the weekends you're supposed to have off, you're then on standby, and you can be called in, you're not having a life.
Yeah, I've heard that same that same challenge in, not just with the Department of Corrections, but a lot of first responder agencies that, you know, they're short-staffed to begin with, and those people who are working those shifts, it's just this perpetual, it's like a feedback loop. You know, some people will leave because it's short-staffed, and then it becomes even more short-staffed, increases the stress on everybody who remains, and it's, yeah. So I hear where you're coming from, is what I'm trying to say.
Is there anyone else from the state police who would like to
Sure.
offer a comment?
So
If you could identify yourself for the record, since
my name is Christina Granger.
Why don't you just sit right there so
they
can all see you?
I've never done this before. I apologize.
okay, most of us never did before.
I'm a probation and parole officer in Brattleboro, Vermont. I actually look at myself as a employee not only for probation and parole, but I also work anywhere from 60 to 90 hours of overtime at Southern State Correctional Facility. For me,
Weekly or?
but I get paid every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks I work 60 to 90 hours of overtime helping in the facility. I can speak for only myself when I say that I'm tired, but I'm tired because I see other people that are just burnt out. You got officers that are crashing cars because they're tired on their way homes. I worked just the other night, there was one responder for the entire facility. That means that one person was required to get out everybody for bathroom breaks. So I sat there for 6 hours with nobody to come and say, hey, do you need to get out to go to the bathroom? Then on top of it, we're being told that now we got to cover hospital coverage because Southern State doesn't have enough staff. Correct, Southern State doesn't have enough staff. Money's going to help, sure, but I can only speak for Southern State because I worked there for 15 years prior to coming out to the field. Southern State's culture is terrible, and it needs to start from the top and work its way down. The expectations need to be set, and that line needs to be towed, and these people that are working need to know the expectations of what the goals and the missions are. And I think during COVID, they've lost a lot of that, and they've lost their bar is gone. Their bench is gone. Half of their bench, a lot of it sits in Brattleboro in probation and parole. We've worked our way out. I'm one of these people that doesn't mind going in and helping out, but you know, you gotta, somebody somewhere has to step up and tell these new people what their job and what their role is, and then make them, you know, you come in every day, you do the same thing. That's how I learned when I got into this field. Been in this field for 25 years. I worked in New Hampshire. I came over here and I had strong leadership that told me what my job was and told me the expectations. And I came in every day and did what I was told. And I built myself to this place where I am. I'm a dedicated state employee for the Department of Corrections. I do more than my fair share to help out. And I just, you know, you can tell me all day that money doesn't help, but it does help. But you also have to fix the culture that this department has. And specifically, I know firsthand Southern State has a terrible culture.
I really appreciate your testimony. What are some of the cultural changes you would like to see at Southern State? What would make it a better culture?
I think currently there are new recruits training gap employees. You just don't have, they let go of the staff that were strong. I mean, they still have some strong staff, they're just not utilizing them properly in places that can help them. Take somebody that's miserable and might be buried and give them a little bit and say, hey, take this person under your wing and show them what we want here. But you also have to have the leadership to follow that. You can't just tell some lonely old CEO that you want them to mold this guy into something, but we don't know what quite yet, because COVID's kind of lost all of those expectations. And I think that they really need to have strong people in some strong positions at that facility to bring it all back.
Okay, is there any, I've got two questions kind of, so what I hear you talking about is sort of mentorship and a formalized process of mentorship. And I also hear you talking about kind of a lack of vision, value, and mission statement.
I believe so at that facility, yes.
Thank you.
Is there any other employee who would like to speak? Briefly, Commissioner Dunn and Commissioner Kent, can you come back Friday? To respond, and I want to give you enough time, and we got held up. Not held up, because
Probably my fault.
and Peggy will schedule it, let you and Steve know. Go ahead, please.
Hi. My name is Shane Garrett, I'm CO2 at Northwest State Correctional Facility.
Northwest, that's in Franklin,
Yeah,
St. Albans.
St. Albans.
I don't have to know where it is.
Yeah, a little bit of drive.
I worked there in 1969.
Wow.
That ages me, but
That is just the prison.
I like it there, I really do. So I wrote down a couple things, but biggest things I wanted to bring up are the issues that we're having on the floor. That to me are kind of a pretty big deal. We're shutting down our post officer on a regular basis, and we don't have enough officers. That's the armed officer that patrols the fences, keeps everybody inside the facility safe, and ensures that nobody's escaping. When we don't have staff and we take that person away, we're basically sending somebody out like once an hour to do a tour around the facility, and that's what we do. We don't have enough floats on a regular basis. When we don't have enough floats, we shut down units. When we shut down units, they either get a modified rec or they get no rec because they have a second officer, like Echo, and we take that second officer to have them float because we don't have any on the floor. When we have hospital trips, we're most of the time automatically just shutting down something so we can send somebody somewhere. It's very rare that we have the officers that we need to run normally. I mean, it poses a lot of problems. Incarcerated individuals are not getting enough rec time when that's taking place. If we're shutting down their unit and they're getting a temporary rec period or a modified rec period, they're not getting their full day out. That causes frustrations and that causes problems. If we do that on a regular basis, that causes tempers and then people get hurt. That's the bottom line. On a regular basis, we run normally, like everything's fine, even when we're short officers. So we've gotten numb to the fact that Delta, the SAG unit, always supposed to run at 2 people. We pretty normally run it at 1. If we're above a certain amount of people, we say 2. If we can't afford that, we don't do it. I've never seen anything quite like it is right now. Some facilities seem to be doing halfway okay from what I'm hearing. I'm not there, I don't see it. Northwest State is not doing well. If we didn't have POs, if we didn't have caseworkers coming in on a regular basis and helping out with overtime, we wouldn't be running it all. That's it.
How many hours are you working a week?
Regularly, this past week, I think it's 2 weeks, it's 72. Yeah. 72. Is that what the time? So 132 hours That's what I did the last 2 weeks.
132.
132 hours. And that's without coming on my days off. I mean,
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, how long is your average shift?
12 to 16 hours. Normally, you're just kind of hoping that you're not gonna get for 16, but I sign up now for the most part because I like predictability and I'd like to just be like, well, if I'm gonna get hit, this is where I'm going, that's the way it is. You know,
How does it impact the offenders that are, or the inmates that are incarcerated?
I have good relationships with these guys. They tell me on a regular basis that they're frustrated. You know, when you shut down a unit in the morning because we don't have enough people to actually keep floats on the floor, and we're shut down till 10, everyone in my unit will see me doing my tours, running the unit, but everyone's in their cells, and they're like, why can't we come out? Because we don't have people to come here if there's an emergency. You know, I don't know. There's really no other way to put it. You know what I mean? It's just dangerous. And it affects them, it affects us. We've got good officers that create rapport with people and talk to people and get along well with them. And we'll try and, you know, talk to people like, yeah, I get that you're frustrated, but, you know, things will get better. But not only do they need to get better for the officers, they need to get better for us so they can be better for them, you know, because we're also doing them a disservice if we're not giving them what they need, you know. And I care about my incarcerated image. I do. I developed, I don't want to say relationship, but somewhat of, you know, a professional relationship with these people, and they depend on me. And I take that seriously. I do. And I have a lot of coworkers that depend on me. And not a lot of people stepped up to do this. We work a lot of hours. I'm doing this on my own time because this is important to me. And it needs to be done. Something needs to be done.
My guess is that there's not a lot of structure in their lives. They're left in cell most of the day. And, you know, they need things to build on steam and things to do.
When it happens, it's not fun, for sure. I mean, even that point aside, me alone, I was standing at my sink one day, washing dishes, and I had the evening with my kids. I think it was the first Friday in quite a while. I hadn't worked at 16. And while I was washing dishes, my fiance was working, and I had my 2 kids, and I turned around, and my son was crawling. He stood up and just started walking around. So I immediately called my fiance, and I was like, Alden's walking. He just got up and started walking. She's like, he's been walking for 2 weeks. So that's how much time I spend at home with my kids. So I'm here to tell you guys what's going on because, you know, somebody has to.
Thank you. I thank you all for coming in. You're welcome to come back and let me talk to the commissioners. I want to know more about what we can do to help. It's a national problem. It's not just Vermont, by the way. It's not just in corrections, not just in DCF. The programs that I used to run at Bennington are down about 50% employees. That's putting extra stress on those employees that are still there. Burnout is a huge factor. We need to deal with it. And there's also this, I don't quite understand it because I'm working at my age, but this idea that you don't have to work anymore. Need to figure that one out too. A lot of people are just tiring early, I guess. But thank you for being here and thank you all for what you do. I have tremendous respect for both the correctional officers inside the facilities as well as probation and parole outside. And I would love to get a decent way to deal with the hospital situation. And if you have suggestions, you sit on Senator Bruce and I sit on appropriations. We'll be happy to look at ways to deal with that. But it is a huge problem because you have to take 2 officers to sit with somebody. at Albany Med, there were 2 New York correctional officers with 1 shackled inmate in the emergency room sitting nearby me. And, you know, the only time they could leave him was when he went in to see a physician or get tested or whatever. It was interesting to watch. So I saw them sitting there with this guy, and I was thinking about the 2 in Vermont that have to do the same thing. There may be some way around this, but I don't know what that is. So we're gonna.
Thank you very much, Senator Sears, members of the committee for hearing us, and we'll come back at your meetings.
Yeah, I would love to hear more on Friday about what we can do. I don't think this is something the commissioners.
Thank you.
We're gonna talk to him about it, talk to us about it. But maybe together we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.